So we've started our new podcast. Thank you for coming, Malfono George. From what I've understood from my father is that he interviewed you probably around 30 years ago or something like this. So it seems like it's a tradition in our family to interview you. Thank you for coming. And I wanted to actually ask you to begin with explaining where you were born, what you've done, and actually basically what you've done to come on our podcast. Why are we interviewing you? I mean, we should know that, but you could explain to the world what's so special.
So I was born in Bethlehem in Palestine in 1965, if you want to know the year, so you can calculate now. I grew up in Bethlehem. It's a small town. And I went to Lutheran schools. My schooling is mostly in Lutheran schools. But then in the summers, my parents used to send us to the Qashisho to learn Suryoyo. It was very important to our parents. So this is how we learned Suryoyo, me and my sisters. And that was every single summer. So that's why the Suryoyo got strengthened. And at some point, Abuna told my father that they should bring me to the altar. And I was a little boy, was brought to the altar. So in the weekends, I would have a Suryoyo life. And during the week, I also was sent to a boarding school. So I was in the school until I finished middle school. And then for high school, I was mostly at home. And then by that time, I began to go more often on my own to our monastery at St. Mark. So I began to learn more Suryoyo and get involved more with the church. And after I finished high school, I immigrated, or the family immigrated to the United States. So I did my undergraduate studies. I did engineering in the United States. And then I decided I want to do Suryoyo, more Suryoyo. So I went to Oxford to study with Sebastian Brock, who today, occasionally, as it just happened, became Suryoyo himself and joined the Syrian Orthodox Church. So I did my graduate studies in England, and then I went back to Los Angeles. So this is the short version of the story.
Right.
Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, when you say Suryoyo, you mean Ktobanoyo or you mean Turoyo? So are you able to speak the Turoyo?
I can understand, but I cannot speak it.
Okay,
so when I say Suryoyo, I mean Ktobanoyo.
Okay, understood.
So what was the main language that was spoken at home?
Home was Arabic. So
Arabic.
my father's side were Turkish speakers, Turkish and Armenian. They came from Kharput. My mother's side were Arabic speakers. From Azekh. But the local culture, of course, Bethlehem is Arabic speaking. So Arabic was the native language.
Right.
And just to be clear, because I'm completely unaware, Bethlehem is in what currently is called Palestine?
Yes,
But
Bethlehem is in Palestine in the West Bank.
Yes. And St. Mark?
St. Mark is in Jerusalem in the Old City, technically the West Bank, because it's in the Old City is
divided.
The Old City is the West Bank by international law.
Okay. And so it's easy to reach for you?
During my time, it was easy to reach. I could just hop on the bus and go.
Okay.
But now it's not easy because now there's a wall. I have to take my Darmono.
No problem.
Sorry, we should have done this before. Do you mind?
No, that's not a problem at all. We can just
don't even have to cut it.
Well, when it happened, it was funny, so you can leave that in.
You don't have to cut it.
I was afraid that it was mine, but
me too. Everyone was looking for their phones.
Who's gonna lose their job now?
Yes, so I will get high now, and
that's fine. That's gonna make the conversation more interesting.
To make the conversation more interesting.
Malfono, we are recording. You should be careful.
Yes, that's fine. It's fine by me.
No, it's good to have a little bit of humor as well in our conversation. So that's good. I want the awkward silence to be cut out.
No, just leave it there.
You can put music.
Yes, put
Dar-
some music.
The harmono music.
Some elevator music.
Yes. All right.
Harmono music.
Yes. All right. Now we're in business.
We're back in town.
Right.
So where did we left off? I think it was it was
the,
easy
the,
to
the, yeah, it was easy during my time because everything was open.
Yeah.
But now there is a wall surrounding the Palestinians. They cannot move.
Yeah.
So it's not easy.
So if your family wants to go now, if they were still living there, if you have any family living in Bethlehem,
they would, if I was still living there, let's say, and I want to go to St. Mark's for prayers and whatnot, I would need a permit.
yeah, okay.
But to say I want to go to pray is not sufficient to get the permit.
Mm.
So most likely it will be denied.
Okay.
Unless I was a shamosho and the church made some special permit for me, and then I can go maybe as a shamosho. But usually movement is not easy for
Okay.
Palestinians.
But that wasn't the case when you were growing up. So the conflict didn't affect you in that sense.
So the conflict was there because it was still under occupation, but it wasn't to the conflict was not as bad as it is now.
Right.
So in 1967, so until 1967, that's basically Bethlehem was under Jordan. What we are calling now the West Bank was
Yes.
under Arab rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 2 years old when the war happened, and then that's when Israel managed to take the whole area, but the West Bank area was still under civil administration under Jordan and under military occupation and military control of Israel, but open. You could go back. You could go back and forth. And I left in '83. And it wasn't until, I believe, 86 when there was the first intifada, the uprising. And ever since then, it becomes worse and worse and worse until we got to the mess we are in today.
And growing up in that area, in that part of the world, how were your parents? Were they strict for you? Or how did you grow up in this household?
Sorry, my parents, strict as parents or?
Yes, as parents. Were there strict rules? Did you have to go to church on Sunday?
I see. I wouldn't say strict. I was encouraged to go on Sunday, and I liked it. So it wasn't that I was kicking that I don't want to go, and they said no, you must go. So I kind of liked it. So I wouldn't say it was strict, but it was normal Middle Eastern life, I would say.
Middle Eastern upbringing.
Upbringing, yes. And there's no any other upbringing in the Middle East
Exactly.
because you are in the Middle East.
Yes.
Okay.
So normal upbringing.
Normal for you, a normal
Yeah,
upbringing.
of course.
Yeah, because sometimes we hear that people feel that their parents were too strict in their life, or even too relaxed in their life. But you experienced it as normal part of life, going to church and.
Yes, I think the sense of strictness you're talking about is more of a diaspora life.
Yes.
Yeah, I think as well.
I don't think it's a Middle East type strictness, because here you have parents coming from a different setting, and then the kids want to do something else. So it's not the same sense of strictness we're talking about.
Do you notice this in your own children in relationship to yourself?
We are easy parents.
Okay.
So our kids, all of them live in our house. That's why we're easy parents. So sometimes my wife and I talk. We should be a bit more tough so they can leave. They're not leaving. But we basically let our kids be, and we raise them in a certain way. And obviously, we do advise, and when somebody does something wrong, you could tell them. But also, if you treat them as adults, even before they become adults, it becomes easier, I think. Okay. At least with us, it was easier.
True. you spoke about the diaspora, but in a sense, isn't our community in Bethlehem and in Palestine, in Israel, aren't they a diaspora as well? Because most came from Tur Abdin, if I'm correct, after Saifo, after the genocide.
Yes, so that is correct. So it's kind of a double diaspora for us now. So they came, all the current Suryoye in the Holy Land in Palestine are post-Saifo Suryoye. And they came from various areas from southeast Turkey, not necessarily just Tur Abdin. So in a sense, yes. And in fact, as when they first went to Bethlehem, they were outsiders. And I talk about that in my memoirs also. It kind of comes out how they try to, or I don't know if they try to integrate, but basically they were not part of the fabric, and it takes time. And I was just told, because I was asked the same question because of my memoir book, and I was just told by somebody who works on Bethlehem history or modern history that just recently the big families of Bethlehem have a council from each big family, and the Suryoye were just given a seat. So this is recent. So it takes time to get integrated.
But after more than 100 years, the Suryoye have succeeded in preserving Syriac tradition, and this is also a question that in the diaspora is very relevant. So before we speak about how to preserve our Syriac identity, how would you describe Syriac identity?
So Syriac identity is, again, we need to talk about homeland and diaspora, what identity means. In the Middle East, you belong to a community, and no matter what, everybody knows you are, let's say we're talking about Suryoye, you are Suryoyo. You don't even have to step into a church. You are Suryoyo, and you know you are Suryoyo, and whatnot. In the diaspora, it doesn't work this way, because in the diaspora, if you live outside of the church, and let's say here in Europe, outside of the Hudre and outside of the organizations, then there's a melting pot, and you melt away, basically. And after a generation or two, you may not be Suryoyo, while that doesn't happen in the Middle East. So it's a different type of this identity business. So what is Suryoyo as an identity? I mean, it is so difficult because it's wrong to think of identity in a linear manner. It's usually a matrix. It's a complex matrix. Part of it is religion. Suryoyo are Christian, but there's so many other Christians out here. So clearly it's a different type of Christian. It's also a culture. To some, it's an ethnicity. And you can take it from one level to the next, and to some people, it's more than ethnicity. It's nationalism. It's a nation. Some people talk of a nation. So everybody takes it differently. So it's kind of this complicated matrix, and part of you is Middle Eastern in general as well, and part of you have, if you came from Turkish areas, Turkish elements culturally, whether you like it or not, and some people have Arabic elements, whether they like it or not, be it language, be it music, be it the debkes, be it what not. So it's not cannot be defined in a sentence.
Right.
It's this complex matrix that sometimes we try to make our life easier to simplify it, but it's not easy to simplify.
No, because if someone asks me, what are you, what's your identity or whatever, I can say, well, I'm Dutch, and everybody will know what I mean. But if you say I'm Suryoyo, I'm Syriac, how do you explain to a Westerner what that means?
It is not easy because there aren't that many of us. Of course, if there were millions of us, you don't have to explain it. So I remember, for example, when I went to England, from the United States, if people ask you, who you are. So I come from Palestine. If I have a headache and I don't want to sit and explain, and I'm not in the mood of explaining, I say I'm Palestinian at the end of the story. People again, because people know what a Palestinian is. Yeah. When you say I am Suryoyo, you have to be willing to explain. You cannot say I'm just like I'm Suryoyo, and forget about it. But usually, when people get to know you, more than just passing, by the street and meeting somebody in a cafe, they'll start knowing that you belong to this community, this Suryoyo community or Syriac community, whatever you want to call it in English. And they will know you're some sort of a Middle Eastern Christian. And it will take them a while, and it will take you a while to explain to them, who you are. It's not a push of a button, and it can't work as a push of a button.
And if they keep asking, for example, because we have a discussion in our community about ethnicity between different groups. Some say we should identify as Arameans, others would say Assyrians, others would even say Chaldeans. Or how do you view this, and how would you explain? Should we identify as all of them, or is one correct, or how do you view this?
I think identity at the end of the day is individual, and it is who you think you are. And you should have the freedom to identify, yourself in a specific manner. Now, there is the organic identity. Now we're talking about labels. We're not really talking about identity.
That's true.
We're just talking about labels. So just to make that clear, you have the egg. You're talking about the cover of the egg. That's all what you're talking about as labels. There is the organic label, which if you grow up like me in Bethlehem, in Arabic you are Syriani, in Syriac you are Suryoyo. If somebody grew up in a different setting, let's say somebody grew up in the Church of the East setting, they will be called in Arabic Ashuri, or it will be Aturaya, let's say, And the same thing for a Chaldean, if somebody was born Chaldean and raised in that setting. This is the organic label, the label you were born with and the community around you is using. Then there is and most people have their organic label, and this is it. That's the end of the day.
Exactly.
Then you have people who belong to certain groups. I don't want to say political groups, but identity is more of an ideology, let's say. It's not the organic identity, it's the ideology identity. So let's just talk about the Suryoye, let's say, and here here in the diaspora. Somebody may feel that as an ideology, they believe they are Assyrian or they are Aramean. And in between that, you have this problem of, even if it's not an ideology for you, you have this problem of how do I say Syriani or Suryoyo in these Western languages? Because those words are not in those native languages, unless you start using them and everybody starts saying I'm Suryoyo, then it just becomes easier, right? Because those words, what is the proper translation? and then everybody has a different view. So somebody in Germany, for example, if somebody asks my sister, then she will most likely say, Ich bin Arameans, let's say. Not as an ideology.
No.
This is just her default.
Yes.
This is her default translation, right? But somebody could say it as an ideology. You know, that they don't want to make, they want to make a point.
Yes.
You know, they want to make a point. And the same thing goes for with the Assyrian identity, and for Chaldeans, I guess it will be with the Chaldean identity. So I don't have an answer to each individual what to say, because they have to say what feels right for them. But then you end up with the problem is that you don't have, as a community, you don't have
unity.
One name. I wouldn't say you don't have unity. You don't have one name that you can all use. The question is that the problem or not? Now, I am a Kiraz. My cousins are Davids. They're not Kirazes. They're my first cousins. You know, doesn't mean they're not my first cousins. They're using a different label. They're still my cousins. Is it a problem, or are we making it a problem? You know, is it a problem, or are we making it a problem? So there is so much of this discussion that goes on that, again, is just talking about a label and forgetting the substance and forgetting what's inside. And it can become quite distracting.
Right.
And sometimes when there is a problem that is unsolvable, because everybody is sticking to their guns, basically, to the labels that...
But is it unsolvable?
They were born. Well, so far it has been.
That's true.
Okay. You can have hope.
Yes.
Why not just let people be and stop talking about it like we're talking about it now? And maybe it will resolve itself. I think it's very important for people to be accepting. Accepting others as they are, as they want to be, and not start pushing people around, and then everybody is becoming a historian. Everybody's becoming a historian. Yes. Leave history for the historians, you know. That's my take on it. But yeah.
Maybe you have questions
or my
as
initial
well,
take on it.
Joseph, but I just have one more question about this. For you, Malfono, what is the most important marker in your Syriac identity?
For me, it's really the language. Mostly, I would say it is the language. And if you look at my work, everything is really around language. That's what connected me to the church, actually. Everybody gets connected differently. I talk to people and they say it is the qole and the melodies and the music. This is what, and the gudo. The gudo connected me, you know. To me, personally, and this is personal, it doesn't have to be for anybody else, but to me it was language, and it's the language that is the strongest marker of identity for me personally. But again, it doesn't have to be for everybody else.
What is it for you, if I may ask?
Well, before I answer that question, I have another question for Malfono. And it's a good question because it will make sense in a bit. Malfono, would you consider non-ethnic Suryoye who might become Syriac Orthodox, would you consider them Suryoyo? For example, I became Syriac Orthodox in 2013. I got married to a Syriac woman. We've got a child, a second one coming. Would you consider me or other converts Suryoyo, and could you identify them as Suryoyo?
Yes, I would. And this is because words, and we talked about labels before, Suryoyo, Assyrian, Aramean, whatever, because these words and even this thing we're sitting on it, the table, always they have different meanings. So if you open a dictionary under any word, you say number 1 definition, number 2 definition, number 3 definition. So if I am now to create a lexicon and say the word Suryoyo, what does it mean? Then I will say, okay, number 1, somebody from the Middle East who is born into, let's say, a Suryoyo family, be it Syriac, Orthodox, Catholic, whatnot. So that person is a Suryoyo. Somebody from India who is Indian, who belongs to the Syriac Orthodox Church or to the Syro-Malabar Church or the Syro-Malangara Church, he is Suryoyo. Now we're talking about Suryoyo in Guatemala, the new convert. And there is the Suryoyo across from me, 2 different Suryoye. One according definition number 1, one according definition number 2.
Right.
So I would definitely consider you Suryoyo. Sebastian Bragg just became Suryoyo today.
Exactly.
You know, in his heart, he probably was Suryoyo as a Syriac scholar before.
Yes.
Definition number 3.
Yes.
Yeah. So because of the different labels and the different meanings, definitely.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Joseph, I can fully agree with this answer because I believe that Syriac identity is very much connected to Christianity, to Syriac Christianity. So I view the word Suryoyo or Syriac as an ethno-religious term with a heavy emphasis on the religious part, in such a sense that you can become Suryoyo when you accept Christ within the Syriac tradition. So you're able to become Suryoyo, which is very interesting because, especially as a European, because in Europe, it's very difficult to become Dutch or German or French or whatever when you come from the Middle East. But for Syriacs, this is a very open definition. You can become one of us. How do you become one of us? By literally becoming one with the body of Christ, which is within the church. So that's how I view the word Syriac. And sometimes I notice, Malfono, that some people find it weird when I say, oh no, Suryoyo, no, I am Syriac, but I really feel Suryoyo because it is my absolute identity from morning to evening, because I've met Christ in the Syriac church, in the Syriac tradition. And because this Syriac tradition was preserved by Syriacs, I can enjoy the Christian life. So that's, I think, my answer, Joseph, to...
I actually kind of agree. Mostly, I would only add to it that for me, the part of unity where the Suryoye come under one name besides Jesus Christ, obviously, is the seat of the patriarch. So I can see the seat of the patriarch, the one thing that unites all, let's say, Suryoye, and differentiates us from, for example, the Syrian Church of the East and the Ashuris.
Yeah, but for example, Maronites. Some Maronites would also argue we're also Suryoyo.
Yeah, true.
And Syrian Catholics.
And Syrian Catholics, but also Chaldeans and even the Church of the East would say we're Suryoye.
But you wouldn't, because you would say that they hold to a different tradition of the Syriac Orthodox faith.
Well, I said in my definition very clearly that it's accepting Christianity within the Syriac tradition. Then the discussion would be, what is the Syriac tradition?
Yes, yes.
I will leave that for another time. I think.
and all of this will lead to leading to 2 things. One is that identity is dynamic.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's forget Suryoyo and
That's true.
let's talk about white and not white.
Mm.
Okay. When I immigrated to the United States in 1983, I was shocked. Anytime you have to fill any sort of paper in the United States, you have to say, what are you? You are white, you are Hispanic, you are other, you are African American and whatnot. Silly questions, but it's in all forms. You go to school, a job application,
Really?
everything, you have to. So you look at all the possibilities. Okay, white. this is the closest. Yeah. And in fact, all my generation, people who immigrated during my time, or even Suryoye, we're talking about Suryoye, who were born and in America, but they're my generation, we are white. Fast forward to today, our kids are definitely not white. Our kids will not identify as white. If they are filling an application, if there's Middle Eastern, they'll check it. If there isn't, they'll put other. So one time I was filling one of these applications and I was asked, I said, well, in the 80s I was white, but apparently not anymore. So that means that this business of identity and classification, one, is dynamic.
Yes.
B, and most importantly, it's a social construct. It's in our heads. We are creating it. It's not an absolute. So it's not an absolute. It is something that we are creating. And if the situation changes, that means this label will change. I've always identified as Suryoyo. In Bethlehem, we also grew up that we come from an Aramaic background or Aramean background. So these were the labels that in my youth I've always used. And I'm going to tell you an anecdote that has to deal with Schiphol here. I went to the consecration of Mor Polycarpos in Damascus. And after that, I had a project of digitizing archives in Mardin. We went to Turkey. After Turkey, I came here for his installation. I was born in Palestine. And at the airport, I'm going back with him, with his brother. Sorry, not with him. I was myself and his brother, who's born in Turkey, and an elderly woman who came from the United States for these festivities, who was born in Syria. This is not right after 9/11 or a few years after 9/11. Imagine the hoopla at Schiphol Airport. So basically, they separated us to, ask us separately. Why were you in Syria? I'm explaining. My friend, he's a bishop, became a bishop. I went, why Turkey? After this whole business, he goes, oh, so you're Assyrian? I said, yes. Okay, pass. Same trip. I land in New York. Of course, they're looking, where were you? Same problem. You're in Syria, and you went to Mardin, and then you went. All these questions. And I'm trying to explain to the guy. And he goes, oh, so you're Coptic? I said, yes. The situation can change your identity.
Yes,
because, so these things are dynamic.
Right.
And I think we have to take them as dynamic and not so absolute to ease the tensions.
But
I think of the current tensions.
But I think, Malfono, that we should also be careful not to make it too fluid, because identity, I think, is also based on reality and real things. It would be, well, for our context, it would be strange for me to say, well, I'm Chinese.
Of course. But the situation will not arise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
so
if you were coming from China and somebody is badgering you and you just want to get away from them, you'll say, I'm Korean, and you'll be, just to get away from, with the situation. So that's the example I'm trying.
No, definitely.
It doesn't mean that every day I'm going to say I'm Coptic. Of course, I'm not.
I agree, and definitely identity is definitely fluid. I mean, it can change, and I think also the word Syriac or Syria for us has changed through the ages, because now it means much more than just ethnicity. It means actually accepting Christ in the Syriac tradition. So I agree with that. But at the same time, I think we should also be careful not to make it too much of a social construct, because it is based on real world things, on facts. That's the only point I'm also trying to make. So,
and anthropologists would disagree with you.
I know.
Anthropologists would disagree with you.
Yes.
But,
yes.
Yeah.
So, is there any other question you want to ask relating identity? Because then we can switch finally to the interesting topics of, for example, the biblical canon. By the way, I shouldn't face you because then I'm not, you can't hear my voice. This is the Syriac English New Testament, the traditional Syriac Peshitta text, and the Antioch Bible English translation, done by George Kiraz, editor. For everyone, get this book. It's very good. He wrote it. No, I think God wrote it, but he translated it. And I read most of it. Usually I read a different translation, but I really like this one. And more than I like the translation, I like the preface. Most of the things that were in there I knew, but I learned also new things. And to be honest, this book is only worth buying just if you want to read the preface, because it's actually amazing. It, like you mentioned, for example, that the original Peshitta doesn't have the original story of the adulterous woman, or John 1:5-7, Johanna Coma or something. And it's things that most people have never heard of, or are completely unaware of, or in the dark of. And for me, this was when I first started to get interested in Christianity. I wanted to read the Bible because that's apparently the holy book of Christianity. And so you look for a Bible and you realize there are different canons, there are different Bibles, and even in the same books of the Bibles, there are sometimes different stuffs. And so you start to research, and obviously you end up with the Peshitta because I am Syriac, but now you have this one, and I hope there will be an Old Testament version of it, inshallah. So what motivated you to make this?
The initial project was a suggestion by some people who began translating. So let's go back to
Sure.
give credit to everybody who did this. So I didn't do all of this by myself. I am the general editor. So that means that many translators and editors and proofers and whatnot. The project began by actually a suggestion by people who were already translating the text of the Peshitta, and they suggested, can we do this project? And that's how it came about. I saw in that suggestion an opportunity that we could have a text in English, but also we can edit an opportunity to edit the Syriac text. The last time it was edited was 100 years ago. It hasn't been kind of touched since then. They're just reproducing it photographically, that to a degree that you could open it and you hardly can see the letters. And also the opportunity to add to it the Old Testament, because the Old Testament, and at least when we started the project, has never been vocalized with Ftoh, Sqofo and whatnot. So I saw an opportunity, and that's why I kind of agreed to do this project and was excited about it. So the question of canon, and again, we will have to talk about the definition. What canon means to us is different than what canon means in the Western tradition.
Mm-hmm.
By Western tradition, I mean Catholic and Protestant.
Yes.
Yeah. And this has to do not only with canon. When we talk about canon, when we talk about sacraments, when we talk about all these things, and even canon as in canon law, the rules of the church. The West is very much strict with such things.
Yes, very systematic.
Very systematic, while the East is not. It's not good or bad, it's just a different culture. Yeah. So when we talk about sacraments, this business of 7 sacraments, which is a Western notion, doesn't apply to the Eastern tradition in general, not just to the Syriac tradition. And the same thing with what's a canon. In Syriac, these are books, plural. It's Kthobay Qudsho, not Ktobo Qadisho, Kthobay Qudsho. There are many books. And in manuscripts, they usually are in chunks. So usually you have a manuscript of the Gospels. You could have a manuscript of St. Paul. You could have a manuscript of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, or the prophets, or the Psalms, or whatnot. The idea of putting this all together in a book comes with the printing age. So this is a very late European idea. I'm going to put them all together. So I think there are only 3 or 4 manuscripts in Syriac that have everything, and they don't agree. They don't agree on the order of the books, or even the content, what to put and what not to put. They always, of course, all of them have the Gospels and all of them have Paul, but we're talking about some other books. So you see this dynamic business also. also with the canon. Also, this is a surprise to so many people that the book of Revelation, for example,
Yes.
is not part of the Peshitta. The Peshitta doesn't have Revelation. In fact, what you have inside this book as Revelation is not Peshito. It comes from the later 6th century Heraclean, or actually not Heraclean, most likely the Felixonian text. And even then, while we have hundreds of manuscripts of Gospels or dozens, let's say, when it comes to Revelation, of this particular text that we're publishing, that's becoming standard, there's only one manuscript. On top of it, the first few pages are missing. So you're telling me where are the first? So if you can open to Revelation, you will see that it begins with one big square bracket. I think the first 8 verses, I cannot remember exactly. Why is it in big square brackets? Yep, you see the square brackets.
Yes, right.
Because the manuscript is incomplete.
So we have no manuscript?
No
in
manuscript
from this?
of those 8 verses.
Oh, really?
So the original editor, who I believe was a Scottish person, took this text from the Heraclean, much later Heraclean version, and changed it to sound like Peshito and put it there. And that's why we're putting there, and there's a footnote that explains all of this. Another thing, we consider James, 1 John, that's part of the Acts corpus. Even in church, we have 3 readings. Some parishes only do 2 maybe. But the first reading is from either Acts, James, 1 John, and the second one is from Paul, and the third one from the Gospels.
Yes.
So why is James and 1 John and not part of the first reading, either or? Because it's one corpus. If you go to the end of Acts, on the side we have the Syriac chapter numbers, not the modern Western numbers. And I can't remember what it is. It's 20-something. And if you look at James, the chapter continues. If it was 27, it becomes 28. It doesn't reset to 1 because it's part of the same corpus. So the canon has its own characteristics as well. And you mentioned some verses are not there. The reason they're not there is because they are not even in the early Greek.
That's true.
Texts. And then the Peshitta was made from those.
So
and then they appeared in the Greek. That's after the Peshitta was done. So that's why they're not there.
So if I'm not sure how I should ask the question. For example, if I have a discussion with, let's say, Muslims or people like this who have a book of which they think
came down from heaven,
and it's literally just this letter and everything is the same everywhere, even though I'm not convinced that's the case, but that's besides the point. They could use this as an argument as like why is the adulterous woman in the Bible, even though the earliest manuscript don't have this. And from what I have done on research, is there seems to be some sort of tradition that went around by word, and it apparently was assigned to John the Apostle, and so they added it to his gospel, even though the earliest manuscript don't always put it where we have it right now. So what's your view on this? Why do we have it there, and should we have it in the Peshitta?
So it's difficult to compare apples with oranges.
True. Yeah, that's right.
In Islam, there is the notion of inzal. Yeah, that means the Quran unzila. That means it came down from heaven. This notion does not exist in Christianity, so it makes no sense to do a comparison.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
we cannot do this comparison. But because we live in the Middle East among Islamic cultures, sometimes we are influenced by that idea.
Yeah, that's
Not
true.
the church, but people. People are influenced by that idea. For example, the Arabic version of the Bible, it's a Van Dyck edition, which was done in the late 1800s. Arabic has changed, has developed. And this is why now you have a new Dutch translation. The language has changed.
Yes.
Arabic has changed. But any attempt to change the Arabic is impossible. Why? Because they live in Muslim society, and then this idea of that the text cannot change becomes an issue. But in Christianity, that's not a problem. And we know this from our Syriac tradition. This Peshitta text is not the first text. Before this Peshitta text, there was Evangelium dem Farshe, which was a much freer translation from the Greek. Before that, there was Evangelium dem Halte, the mixed gospel, which Mor Ephraim used. Mor Ephraim did not use this.
Yeah, he told me that today.
Yeah, Mor Ephraim didn't know this, or maybe he knew this, but it wasn't what he used. When he wrote a commentary, he did not write a commentary on the Peshitta. He wrote a commentary on the Diatasarun, starting with John and moving to some parts of Matthew, then to Luke, and back John and Mark and whatnot. It's a mixture. Yeah, that means the church fathers, and the Syriac church fathers in particular, are okay with the text changing. They're okay with this idea. After the Peshitta, there was a Felixonian version, there was a Heraclean version, and we even know Jacob of Edessa at least did revisions of the Old Testament, at least the Old Testament. So there are other revisions. We know that Mor Dionysius Barsalibi made changes to the Heraclean versions. So the idea that the text can change is okay in the Syriac Orthodox Church. So we can't say, why is this word moving? The other thing that we always have to keep in mind is not to be too literal with the Bible. The Bible got to you through many scribes. And some people ask, what's the original? Well, nobody has a copy of what God said to the prophet. What we have is what people copied. Maybe what the prophet wrote, and maybe what the next copyist and next copyist and next copyist. And then when it came to printing, there were the editors. The one you're holding in front of your hands, there is George Kiraz in between. I'm not a prophet, I'm not a God, I'm not a saint. Yeah, I'm a human being. I could make a mistake. Yeah. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at the biblical text.
Okay, that's I think an exceptionally good answer, to be honest, because I mostly have the same view. So your answer is correct. So how do we understand, or how do we explain to people? Because in the Western mindset, there's also this idea that the Bible should be inerrant and ineffable, and it's like perfect, and it's just in one form and one version. But to such a people, I cannot explain the fact that we as Syriac have a certain canon with certain books and a certain translation, that it's not exactly the same as, for example, the canon of the Copts or the Ethiopians or any different church that we're in complete union with. So how do I explain to such people that even though we have different books, we are part of the same church? Yes.
So I think it's important to explain to people that tradition is very important. So mapping, I tell my students who ask me about who study Syriac, we have Zabnu Da'bar, past tense and present tense and future tense, and if they come from Greek, they want to map it to the Greek tenses, and if they come from English, like, how can I do this in English? And the tenses just don't map. They just don't map. So it's difficult to map this Western idea to what we are talking about. Again, it's like it's apples and oranges. It's impossible to do it because it just does not map. So I think, what does it mean the Bible is inerrant? I mean, it's this particular version, these particular words that you're looking at, it makes no sense.
Right.
I will tell you another story.
Mm.
Another story. We have influenced probably by evangelical games and whatnot. In church, they do these games for kids. They gather them and you say a verse and somebody has to say, it's John or whatnot, or they have to cite a verse and whatnot. And we had one of these games in one of our parishes. They will say a verse and then they'll give a question. Maybe what does it mean? And Sayyidina the Patriarch was then our bishop. And on a number of occasions, then the answer will be given, and Sayyidina would be like, yeah, but this makes no sense. Why? It makes no sense because the people doing the game are taking the King James Version in a very literal manner, and Sayyidina grew up with the Arabic Bible. There's a language difference and there's a version difference. So when we say it's Iran, Iran and no mistake, to what version, to what format, from what language? So the statement itself, in my view, makes no sense, And again, this is why we have to be dynamic. I think in the introduction, I talk about the text being elastic.
Yes.
In our churches, until very recently, and maybe even today, the Kashisha will be looking at Kthobonoyo, and we will be reading it in Turoyo. Of course, that means no two priests are reading it the same way.
That's true.
Is it wrong? It's a different version. Yeah. So
could we say that this Bible is like a part of the tradition of the church?
I would say this Bible is part of the tradition of the church, and I would say that there's a lot of concentration, I think, today, even in the US. And again, we're getting more and more influenced from online by, at least I'm talking from American perspective when I say evangelical type of teachings. I mean, maybe evangelical means something else in Europe. I don't know. In our tradition, faith is more or less is a triangle. We have the Bible, we have the church, and we have the church fathers. That's what constitutes basically what Syriac Orthodoxy is and what Suryoyo is. We're talking about identity, Just looking at the Bible and concentrating on the Bible doesn't give you Suryoyo. It has to be, there's the church, which means the tradition also, and there are, which means the liturgy also, and then you've got the church fathers. If you just want Bible and nothing but Bible, sorry to say, the Syriac Orthodox Church is not your solution.
Right.
You will not get it there.
Right.
Unless you want to change what Syriac Orthodoxy means.
So we have to take everything together, and that forms the tradition. And the tradition is that what forms our faith and protects our Suryoyo and also our faith.
Correct.
Our religion.
Correct.
I think that's a very beautiful conclusion to this podcast. Malfono George Kiraz, thank you so much for being here with us. And of course, we have a small present for you as well, which we'll give to you after we finish the podcast. Are there any last words that you want to give the listeners, the viewers of this podcast? And bearing in mind, it's mostly young Syriac Orthodox believers in the diaspora in a European context.
Yes. So since we started with identity and labels, my message to them is don't bicker about it. That would be a big gift for me.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone watching. I hope somebody learned today something. At least I learned something. And I hope, to be honest, because this is not the first time we've actually met. I just wanted to tell this story real quick. It just popped in my head. It's actually not the first time we met. We met one time in Morogin in Hengelo. when I was on the altar, wrongly, because I'm not a shamosho, but they needed someone to, I don't know what it was. I think I was doing the sisle, whatever it was. And I know people told me, oh, this is Malfono George Kiraz, Malfono George Kiraz. I don't know who this is.
Who is this guy?
Who is this guy? I just came to church. I have no idea who this guy. But now I know, and I hope I will see you more often. And I hope the next time you come, by the grace of God, we will have another, inshallah, longer conversation.
Thank you.
So thank you, and thank you for everyone watching.
Tawdi Saki.